forget how the 4:30 sunset affects the lighting in my videos for the worse, but I guess I'll have to deal with it. So anyway, today's video is going to be a look into all the manga I read in October, or most of them, all the ones that I feel are worth talking about. So for the most part, I had a fantastic reading month. I participated in the Manga Freakathon hosted by Manga Reads Manga, Bizarre Individual, and myself this year, and I had a fantastic time. It was so fun. We did a lot of that stuff over on Instagram. I posted more than I think I've ever posted on Instagram, and I feel like a lot of other people had fun as well. Let me know if you participated down in the comments. But anyway, not only did I read a ton, but I also read some really great things because it was mostly focused on horror manga. That was the theme of the readathon, and of course that is my favorite genre. So I was bound to read a lot of great things, and I definitely did. Unfortunately, if I'm going to do this video in the order that I typically do it, I go through it chronologically, and the first thing that I read was Battle Royale, and this is pretty much the only thing that I really did not like this month that I read. Now, I have many issues with this manga, and I will try to go through all of them. I know this is a very, I wouldn't say highly loved, but many people really enjoy it, and I suppose I can understand why. But let me just start out by saying I was warned about the translation of this manga and Tokyopop's old translations in general, and I thought I was prepared, but I was not, because pretty much every single dialogue bubble is just filled with teenage slang, or slang that people think teenagers would use, and maybe like 20 years ago they did use this slang, but every single, at least male character, sounds the same because they all use the same slang dialogue, and it's horrible. Additionally, the dialogue is also very stilted. Like, instead of saying full sentences, people just say phrases, and they all talk the same, so they all sound the same, and just horrible to read. I did not enjoy the dialogue at all. It did not seem realistic. No one in real life talks like this, and I highly doubt that 20 years ago people talked like this. I just don't believe it. So dialogue was my number one issue, at least when I started reading it. And I've mentioned this before, but I have read the novel, the original novel, Battle Royale, and I enjoyed that for the most part. It was not my favorite novel, but I did enjoy it. However, because of that, I pretty much knew all of the plot points that are supposed to be surprising, so it really didn't have that going for it because I wasn't surprised by anything. It follows the novel pretty well, which I would say is a positive, but it's just that it didn't have that selling point for me, so a lot of the flaws it had were more front and center that I noticed anyway. And despite the fact that it follows the novel pretty closely, one of my main issues is the fact that it's a manga and it uses the manga exaggeration thing so much and so heavily, which you can understand with like the gore and stuff. That stuff didn't bother me, but if you look at Mitsuko's character, she is one of the like best fighters in this group. I haven't explained the plot of Battle Royale, but I feel like everybody knows the plot of Battle Royale. Anyway, Mitsuko is like one of the most powerful students in here, or she seems to be, and it was really difficult to read any of her fights because anytime she was on the page, she was taking her clothes off. And it was really disappointing because you had characters like this, and I can't remember his name at the moment, but he's like the other like super badass character who's really scary. So all of his fights, super cool. I really enjoyed the action scenes actually, and his fights were really awesome. And so she's supposed to be like the female equivalent or just as badass as he is, but you can see right here, this is how they treat their characters. So the main male character gets to look super stoic, and this is how the really cool female character looks. This is not the main male character, but the most like scary male character. Anyway, so yeah, we can see right here, this is how it treats its male and female characters, and that's really disappointing. So I really dreaded any time I got close to one of her big scenes because I knew it was going to turn into like this super sexually graphic fight, I guess, instead of like a cool fight. In the novel, she was one of the most interesting characters in my opinion. Her scenes were really, I guess fun isn't the right word, but I did enjoy reading her scenes. Definitely not in the manga because wow, it got really bad a lot of the times. And I didn't even get to like the big scene with her, but I ended it on volume 8. I dropped it after volume 8, and that's because it was a fight with her and some other character, and It was horrible. Horrible to read. And as I mentioned, I did read the novel, and of course, I'm not going to say that the novel is like the most intelligent book I've ever read with the most interesting social commentary, but it is a dystopian novel, and I feel like it did have some interesting discussions about government overreach, censorship, and resistance. And while those elements were included in the manga, because the manga follows the novel pretty closely, I feel like all of that was pushed to the side or didn't get the focus that it needed to, and instead we just got like shocking images with the gore and the assaults and everything else. So instead of having these like interesting discussions, we just have shock value. And that is just not what I want to read. I am much more interested in manga that make me think. I don't care about shock value, really. At the risk of sounding insulting, I want something with more depth, and Battle Royale was not doing anything for me. Again, it could be because I already knew all of these discussions that were taking place because I'd read the novel. I don't know, I just feel like the manga did not do it very well. In fact, I disliked the manga so much that I felt like if I kept reading after volume 8, I was kind of going to ruin the novel for myself, because the author of the novel seems to be pretty involved in the manga, so it was kind of disappointing to feel like this manga was not good and then see that the author is really enjoying it and their thoughts on the characters that did not match my thoughts on the characters, so I just had to stop reading after volume 8. I might watch the movie, I don't know. I've heard good things about the movie, but then again, I also heard good things about the manga. I know there's also like a spin-off, like a new version of Battle Royale called Battle Royale Enforcers, which has recently started releasing in English. Maybe I'll check that out. But in my opinion, this version of the manga was not that good. So if you're like really looking for it and you've been trying to get a good deal on it, maybe read some more reviews. I don't know. I did not like it. Next, I read something a little bit more enjoyable for me, and that was The Town of Pigs. This is by Hideshi Hino, who also did Panorama of Hell, which is one of my favorite manga that I've read this year. I read it back in February, and I absolutely loved it. So I was very, very excited to finally get a chance to read The Town of Pigs. This was published before Panorama of Hell, at least by Starfruit Books, but my copy that I originally ordered got lost in the mail, and I never received it. So luckily, they decided to reprint this, and I was able to get a copy. So I read this, and I definitely enjoyed it. This is about a village that is suddenly attacked by this group of shadowy figures who start rounding up the villagers and putting them in cages. That's about all I'm going to say. If you've read any Hideshi Hino, you know that he has very grotesque imagery, and it's almost so grotesque that it becomes silly. I definitely felt that in Panorama of Hell. This one as well obviously has the grotesque imagery. I'm not sure it's as funny as Panorama of Hell was, at least in the beginning, but it's definitely very twisted, and it had another fantastic ending that left me thinking, so it's safe to say I definitely enjoyed it, and I'm looking forward to any more Hideshi Hino works that I can get my hands on in the future. Next, this might have been the best thing that I read in October, which is saying something because I read a lot of great things, but I read the complete H.P. Lovecraft's At the Mountains of Madness. This is adapted by Go Tanabe, so I'm going to be very vague about this manga on purpose, because when I went into it, I didn't know anything, not even the synopsis that I'm about to share with you, and I was so shocked when I read it. So what I'm going to say it's about is a group of researchers go to Antarctica to set out to be some of the first people to explore this continent. However, they quickly realize that something is deeply wrong when some of the men in their group are found dead, mutilated, strewn across the landscape. They're clearly killed in a horrific manner, and if this wasn't strange enough, near their bodies is this huge geometric star shape in the snow, and clearly there's a lot of strange things going on, and I think strange is the perfect word to describe this manga. It went in a direction that I never ever could have predicted, and I thoroughly enjoyed reading it. It is kind of slow-paced at parts. There's lots of talking and strategizing throughout here, but I didn't mind it. I really enjoyed that actually, because I feel like a lot of manga are just so quickly paced that you don't get a lot of time to stop and think. In this one, you definitely get lots of time to stop and think about the strange things that are happening here. I'm also, of course, really glad that I went with this version of the manga. It was so great seeing this really high quality art in this giant book. I don't normally enjoy these deluxe editions, but I feel like with this manga, it's kind of necessary. If they end up doing any more H.P. Lovecraft works or adaptations by Watanabe in these editions, I will be picking them up. So yeah, really glad that I ended up saving this manga for the Manga Freakathon. In addition to this, I also read another H.P. Lovecraft adaptation by Watanabe. This one is called The Shadow over Innsmouth. I read this one digitally from my library because I wasn't about to pick up those teeny tiny pocket-sized books for this manga, and I was able to read this on my iPad so I could see the art a little bit better. This is about a mysterious town that has been said to have been destroyed by the government because there's weird things going on with the people there. We don't really know what's happening, but there's rumors, and we follow our main character who has heard these rumors and is going to explore to hopefully find out the secrets of this town. This was another really great adaptation by Watanabe. I have not read the original stories that are written by H.P. Lovecraft, but I'm really enjoying these manga. I'm really glad that I read Mountains of Madness before this one because there were some connections that I was not expecting. I don't think it's necessary to read Mountains of Madness before The Shadow over Innsmouth. I don't think you're going to be confused, but I personally felt like I got more out of it because I read them in this order. I'm really hoping that my library gets the new Cthulhu one soon so I can read that one because I'm definitely looking forward to that one. I've heard fantastic things about it as well, of course. Some people saying that it's their favorite out of all of them. I'm not sure how it could beat this, but we'll see. Next, I read Monkey Peak Volumes 1 and 2. So this is a pretty straightforward story. It's about a group of employees at a pharmaceutical company that is struggling. They've recently been sued or something like that, or have been bought out. I can't remember exactly, but their company is struggling. So as kind of like a group team building exercise, they go on this overnight hike. And that sounds like a nightmare to me personally, but their situation gets worse when they realize that this giant monkey thing with a giant knife is hunting them down and killing them. So I haven't read a lot of slashers, I don't think. I haven't watched a lot of them either, but to me, this seems like what a typical fun, gory slasher story would be. So if you like those, maybe check this out. However, don't do that because it's super expensive. I really enjoyed this manga. I had a fantastic time reading the first 2 volumes. I don't think it did anything like extraordinary, but I did enjoy like the initial shock of seeing people being killed by this monkey, in addition to like the building group tension and the kind of power imbalances that happen, the power struggles, stuff like that. So I enjoyed it for sure. However, each of these volumes is $25 a piece, and I must say, these volumes do not justify that price. It is the same size as like a 7 Seas manga. Here's The Strange House, for example. They're the same size, and this volume is $15, which still to me is pretty expensive. But it is also like stiffer. It does have wider paper if people care about that. I prefer the volumes that are floppy like this. This one's not as bad, but yeah. So I just don't feel like the quality of the manga justifies the price at all. And even though I enjoyed it, I'm unfortunately going to not be buying any more. This series is going to be 12 volumes long, and I'm not sure it's going to have much, if any, rereadability in the future, so there's no way I can justify spending $25 on 12 volumes of manga. It's not that good of a story, okay? It's not. So I'll be cutting my losses here, unfortunately. I'm really sad about that because I did enjoy this manga. If it was even $15 a piece, I would have considered buying all the volumes, but at $25 a piece, that's just insanity. Sorry, it's insane. Next up, I read Dororo. This is another highly influential work by Osamu Tezuka. This manga follows our main character, here, Hyakimaru, he has basically been cursed as a baby. He was born without limbs, without eyes, without ears, without a bunch of his body parts because his father made a deal with a whole bunch of demons. So he has grown up. He is now a samurai. He's been adopted by this man who gave him prosthetics that are made of swords, so his arms and his legs are made of swords. And he teams up with this kid named Dororo, who is a thief, and they basically go out to hunt these demons to get Hyakimaru's body parts back. So this is just a straightforward, fun, supernatural adventure manga. I really enjoy Osamu Tezuka's characters. They're pretty quirky, and I like his sense of humor. It kind of is corny and breaks the fourth wall, but it's fun to me. I do usually prefer his psychological manga, like Otakira Hito and Mew. I like those ones a little bit more, but I do enjoy his adventure stories like this one and then Buddha. I do feel like the ending of this work was quite rushed. I'm not sure what happened there. It felt like there was a lot of story to tell, and it was all kind of just thrown at the end, and it just didn't feel like a satisfying ending at all, unfortunately. But I am glad I read it because this manga, as I mentioned, is very influential. There's an anime that came out, I want to say like 6 years ago now. It's been a while. I watched a couple episodes of that when it was airing, and as per usual, I didn't finish it because I never finish any anime. But I am glad I read this. It was another fun Tezuka work, and I do have quite a few more on my TBR. None as like highly acclaimed as this one, but I will be getting through more of them hopefully before the end of the year, but definitely next year. That's a project I have in mind, is to read a bunch of my Osamu Tezuka works that I have. Another one off the list, at least. Next up is the last series that I read throughout the month. I finished my reading month with a bang, so I read all 8 volumes of Parasyte. This is another classic horror manga, this time with a sci-fi twist. One day, these alien parasites invade Earth and start taking over people's bodies. So we follow our main character, Shinichi, and he has a parasite that tried to take over his body but only got as far as his arm before he was able to stop it. So the alien, whose name is Migi, has full control over Shinichi's arm. So because they are literally stuck together, they reluctantly team up to try to survive against some of the other parasites who all have their own ideals and things they want to accomplish. They are going out and killing people because that's how they eat food. They kill humans. And Shinichi wants to stop this because he cares about other humans. Migi couldn't really care less because he is also a parasite and he thinks that humans are food, and he really has no sympathy for anything. I will say I have been really struggling with new manga pretty much this entire year. There are so many things that I've read and not enjoyed or thought were just okay, so it is so refreshing to read a manga that has been highly acclaimed for decades, and this has definitely, in my opinion, stood the test of time. It was really enjoyable. I really thought Shinichi's struggles were interesting to read about. He is dealing with his body changing, obviously, as well as his mind and his way of thinking. This parasite in his body is obviously changing even more than he thought. So much so that at some points he even begins to question his humanity, and the people around him are noticing that something is different with him. The theme of survival is also a really interesting aspect of this manga. Migi is really focused on it, as well as all the other parasites, and he cannot understand Shinichi's care for other humans, and this is a really big point of tension between these two characters throughout the entire series. I like that we got to see some of the other parasites as well. They all had their own motivations and character arcs, and I thought that was fascinating. Another thing that I felt like was really well done in this manga is the scale. So obviously we are told that these parasites have been affecting humans all over Earth, but we only see this little group in Japan, and it's just very focused. So we get a lot of time to focus on these characters, their motivations, their struggles, and I feel like if he tried to tackle this larger scope, like this entire global issue, it just would have gotten muddled, or you would have needed a really long series, which I wouldn't have minded, but I felt like this was very well paced. It knew what it wanted to address, and I feel like it did it well, which sounds like should just be like the bar. That should be where the bar is, but I've just read so many disappointing manga that having a manga that knows what it wants to do and does it well is so refreshing. And I haven't even mentioned this yet, but I did read the full color collection and I really enjoyed this. Again, I haven't read the original, so I don't know how it compares, but I thought the art in here and the color made all the gory images even more gruesome, and I enjoyed that. Even the emotional scenes, I felt like the color added more depth to those as well. So yeah, definitely a fantastic manga. I'm really glad I read this one as well. Another classic manga to check off my list. So yeah. So those were not all the manga I read throughout the month. I did read a couple other things. I'm not going to talk about them in depth because, I don't know, I just don't feel like it. But firstly, I read Ally by Junji Ito. This is a short story collection by Junji Ito. If you've read one, they're all very similar. This one did not stand out, but it was fine. I really liked the last story about the ice cream. I'll leave that as it is. Then I read, or finished more like, Kitaro. I started this last October in 2023, and this is just like an episodic thing, so I didn't mind coming back to it without restarting it. But I enjoyed this more than I thought I would. It has some interesting stories. Some of them were really fun. I liked the one that also had like Western yokai in it. That was fun. And in tandem with this, I also read the yokai art book. And the reason I can say that I read it instead of just flipped through it is because each of the yokai have their own mini story that Shigeru Mizuki has written. And yeah, so it was really interesting to read this alongside this because some of the yokai that were mentioned here were also included in here. And yeah, it was just kind of fun. And lastly, this was not on my TBR for the month, but I just felt like rereading something, and I feel like The Witch and the Beast is about as October-y as you can get with the vampires and the witches and the necromancers and everything else going on in here. I'm sad that this manga is still on hiatus, but I did still enjoy my reread of it. So yeah, that was everything I read in October. If you have any thoughts on these, whether you agree with me or disagree with me, please leave your comments down below. Otherwise, let me know what you read in October. But that's going to be it for this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!